At first, it was nothing special, just a faint dot drifting across a black screen. One more object in a sky already full of them. Cold. Silent, distant. Every night, telescopes around the world watch the same slow ballet. Rocks, ice, dust, leftovers from the birth of the solar system. Most of them follow the rules. This one didn't. It appeared quietly, crossing the ecliptic, like a ghost that didn't want to be noticed. The software flagged it. Coordinates logged. Brightness measured. Motion confirmed. A routine discovery. Another interstellar visitor. They named it 3I/Atlas. 3 letters, 1 number, a clean label for something very far away. At first glance, it looked harmless. No tail, no flare, no drama. Just a dim point of light, moving exactly where gravity said it should. And for a moment, everyone moved on. But then the data kept coming, and the light curve refused to behave. A light curve is simple. It's how bright an object gets, and how that brightness changes over time. For comets, it's messy. They spin, they shed ice, they flicker and fade. For asteroids, it's rough. Uneven surfaces, random rotation, small chaos. Nature is noisy, but 3I/Atlas was calm. Too calm. Night after night, astronomers watched its brightness rise and fall. Not randomly, not smoothly, but evenly, like something turning, with intention. The curve wasn't jagged, it wasn't wild, it was clean, almost careful. At first, they blamed the instruments. Maybe the telescope glitched. Maybe the calibration was off. Maybe dust or background stars interfered. So they checked again and again. Different observatories, different machines, different continents. Same result. The light curve stayed steady, too steady. Somewhere deep inside the numbers, a quiet discomfort began to grow. Because space doesn't do perfect. Stars pulse, but they wobble. Planets reflect light, but they drift. Comets burn unevenly. Imperfection is the rule. But 3I/Atlas looked measured, as if its reflectivity was controlled. As if its surface was designed to face the sun just so, then turn away, then return again. No one said it out loud, not yet. Instead, emails were sent. Charts were shared. Graphs were redrawn. Scientists stared at screens late into the night, asking the same question in silence. Why doesn't it change? As 3I/Atlas moved closer, its signal grew stronger, clearer, and stranger. The object didn't brighten the way ice should. It didn't darken the way rock should. It behaved like neither. The models began to fail. Equations that worked for millions of known objects did nothing here. Someone ran a simulation, assuming a perfectly smooth body. Still wrong. Someone tried a tumbling object. Wrong again. Someone removed rotation entirely. Still wrong. The light curve held its shape, a repeating pattern, not exact enough to scream signal, but precise enough to whisper something unsettling. In the quiet rooms where this data lived, a shift began. Not panic, not fear, something subtler, disbelief. Because discovery is exciting, but anomalies are dangerous. An anomaly means the rules don't apply. And when the rules break, so does certainty. One astronomer joked, but it looked too well behaved. Another replied, half serious, space doesn't behave. Laughter followed, but it didn't last. As days passed, the object crossed deeper into human awareness. More eyes turned toward it. And still, no one could explain the light. No tail forming, no debris cloud, no chaotic flare. Just a controlled rise and a controlled fall. Like a pulse. Not fast, not slow. Measured, deliberate, and always the same. That's when the word began to surface, quietly, carefully, not in press releases, not in headlines, in private notes, in whispered conversations. Artificial. It wasn't an accusation, it was a question. Could a natural object look engineered? Without being engineered, history said yes, that the data said maybe, and that maybe sat heavy. Because if 3I/Atlas wasn't natural, then it wasn't random. And if it wasn't random, then it had a reason to be here. The sun reflected off its surface in ways no one expected. Angles lined up too neatly. Not perfect mirrors, but not rough stone either. Somewhere between. Like a shell or a casing. Still, no one jumped to conclusions. That's not how science works. Science waits. Science doubts. Science demands proof. But science also recognizes patterns. And this pattern would not go away. As the object continued its slow journey, something else became clear. 3I/Atlas wasn't accelerating wildly. It wasn't braking. It followed gravity, but with restraint, as if designed to pass through, not collide, not linger, just observe and then leave. That thought lingered longer than anyone wanted, because observation implies awareness, and awareness implies intent. Suddenly, the discovery didn't feel small anymore. It felt close, not physically, but emotionally. Because humanity has always watched the sky, wondering if something was watching back. And now, for the first time, the data didn't say no. The discovery that began like any other had quietly crossed a line, from object to question, from rock to possibility, from light to doubt. 3I/Atlas kept moving. The charts kept updating. The light curve kept holding steady. And somewhere between the pixels and the numbers, a realization began to form. We may not have found something new. We may have been noticed. And as the first chapter closed, one question refused to fade. If this was only the first light, what happens when it shows us more? As 3I/Atlas moved closer to the sun, everything should have become easier. Brighter, clearer, more predictable. That's how it always works. When an object approaches perihelion, the closest point to the sun, heat takes over, ice cracks, gas erupts, surfaces change. Comets wake up. Asteroids misbehave. They wobble. They flare. They lose control. Perihelion is chaos. But 3I/Atlas didn't wake up. It stayed calm, almost careful. As sunlight wrapped tighter around it, astronomers watched the brightness curve rise. Not suddenly, not unevenly, smooth. Too smooth. Like a dimmer switch being turned by an invisible hand. Night after night, the graphs updated, and each time the same quiet line appeared. No spikes, no hiccups, no stutter, just a clean, controlled increase in reflectivity. Natural bodies don't do that. They struggle against heat. They shed mass. They react. This one adjusted. At first, scientists told themselves a familiar story. Maybe it's rotating slowly. Maybe it's unusually dense. Maybe the surface is uniform. Maybe. Science lives on, maybe. But perihelion pressure has a way of exposing the truth. As the sun's energy intensified, models predicted disruption. Outgassing should have begun by now. A faint tail should have formed. Brightness should have jumped, then dipped. It didn't. The curve held steady, not flat, not random, intentional. The brightness increased at the same rate. Every single time it was observed, as if the object knew exactly how much light to reflect, as if it was managing exposure. Across observatories, the same quiet tension settled in. Screens glowed late into the night. Coffee went cold. Eyes stayed fixed on numbers that refused to change. Someone whispered a thought no one wanted to own. It's acting like it's correcting itself. The room went quiet. Because correction implies awareness, and awareness implies design. Still, no one said the word artificial out loud. Not yet. Instead, they leaned harder on math. They adjusted angles. They changed assumptions. They rewrote equations that had worked for decades. Nothing broke the pattern. The light curve followed perihelion like it was rehearsed. A perfect drift. Not rushing the sun. Not resisting it. Gliding. And that glide felt wrong, because space is violent near the sun. Radiation tears at surfaces. Thermal stress fractures rock. Jets of gas push objects off course. Yet 3IATLAS stayed centered. Its rotation, if it had one, never betrayed itself. No flashing poles. No uneven reflection. Just a controlled face, turning exactly when needed. Somewhere in the data, another detail emerged. The reflectivity didn't just increase. It leveled itself. When sunlight peaked, the brightness stopped rising. Not because it couldn't, but because it didn't. Almost like a limit had been set. Almost like a rule. That's when perception began to shift. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Slowly. Like realizing a sound you've been ignoring has been calling your name. Scientists are trained to doubt themselves. The human brain sees patterns even when none exist. It wants meaning. It craves order. So they asked the hardest question of all. Is this real? Or are we projecting? Is the pattern truly there? Or are we seeing intention because we want a story? The answer came quietly. From consistency, different telescopes, different filters, different times. Same curve, same drift, same calm response to the sun. Perihelion should have been the breaking point. Instead, it became confirmation. Because if 3I/Atlas were natural, perihelion would have exposed it. If it were fragile, it would have cracked. If it were icy, it would have flared. If it were chaotic, it would have slipped. But it didn't. It behaved like it was designed for this moment. Built to pass close to a star and survive. That thought sat heavy. Because nothing in our solar system was built that way. Not comets, not asteroids, not debris. Only machines are engineered to endure extremes. And even then, they fail. As the object drifted past perihelion, something else became clear. It wasn't accelerating unpredictably. Solar pressure pushed, but the response was muted. Balanced. as if mass distribution had been planned, as if whoever or whatever made it understood stellar physics better than we ever had. The closer it got, the quieter the rooms became. Emails slowed, meetings grew shorter, not because answers were found, but because questions were getting dangerous. What do you say when data doesn't scream, but whispers? What do you do when nothing breaks, but everything feels wrong? 3IATLAS didn't announce itself. It didn't flash signals. It didn't change course. It simply passed through the most violent region of our solar neighborhood without blinking. And that scared people more than chaos ever could, because chaos is familiar. Control is not. As perihelion faded behind it, the object began to drift outward again. Still smooth, still steady. The sun released its grip, and 3I/Atlas responded exactly as expected. Too expected. Like it had already done this before, like this wasn't its first star. That idea lingered longer than anyone wanted, because if this object had passed perihelion elsewhere, around another sun, in another system, then its journey was older than humanity, older than Earth, older than memory. And if that were true, then this wasn't just a visitor. It was a traveler, passing quietly through systems, testing light, measuring heat, drifting with purpose we couldn't yet see. As Chapter 2 closed, one realization pressed harder than the rest. Perihelion didn't change 3I/Atlas. Perihelion revealed it. And the question no longer felt distant or abstract. If this behavior isn't natural, then what kind of intelligence designed something to move so calmly through fire? And more importantly, why did it choose to pass here, now? There's a moment in science when doubt stops being personal, when it no longer lives inside one lab or one tired mind staring at a screen at 2 a.m. That moment arrived quietly, because the signal didn't belong to just one telescope anymore. It belonged to all of them. At first, the odd behavior of 3I/Atlas was easy to dismiss. A calibration error, a software glitch, a fluke of timing. That's how science protects itself from imagination. So they did what they always do when something feels wrong. They asked others to look. Different observatories, different instruments, different skies. Chile, Hawaii, the Canary Islands, Australia. Machines that had never spoken to each other began whispering the same thing. The light curve didn't change. The perihelion drift stayed smooth. The reflectivity followed the same controlled rise and the same careful fall. No noise, no distortion, just the anomaly, repeated, confirmed, locked in. And that's when coincidence stopped being an option. Because one machine can lie, two can agree by accident. But when dozens of independent systems, built by different people in different countries, under different skies, see the same impossible signal, that's not error, that's reality knocking. Inside quiet control rooms, the mood shifted. No one celebrated. No one panicked. They stared. They cross-checked timestamps, compared filters, aligned observation windows. Everything matched. The anomaly wasn't local. It wasn't atmospheric. It wasn't human. It was out there, moving, consistent. And suddenly, the word window took on a new meaning, because astronomers realized something unsettling. This behavior wasn't constant. It appeared strongest during a specific stretch of time, a narrow band as 3I/Atlas passed through a precise region of space. An anomaly window, a moment where the object's behavior became clear, not louder, not brighter, clearer, like a curtain lifting just enough to reveal a shape behind it. And then, slowly, it began to close. That detail changed everything, because if the anomaly had been constant, it could be dismissed as nature. But a window implies timing, and timing implies choice. Somewhere in the data, a subtle synchronization emerged. Brightness shifts lining up with observation cycles, reflectivity changes repeating across instruments, within seconds, not minutes, seconds. Light doesn't lie, and it doesn't wait. If two telescopes see the same shift at the same time, that shift is real. The object wasn't just behaving strangely, it was behaving predictably during observation. That's when the questions grew sharper. Why here? Why now? Why this stretch of space? No one had answers. Only patterns. And patterns are dangerous because patterns invite meaning. Inside research groups, conversations slowed. People chose their words carefully. Emails became shorter. Data was shared, but interpretation stopped. Not officially, just instinctively, because no one wanted to be the first to say what everyone was thinking. That this anomaly didn't feel passive. It felt responsive, like the object knew when it was being watched. That idea made people uncomfortable, so they buried it under caution. They told themselves a story. This is just perception. Our brains are filling in gaps. We're wired to see intention, and that's true. But machines aren't wired that way. Sensors don't imagine. They don't get curious. They just record. And every sensor said the same thing. During the anomaly window, 3I/Atlas behaved differently. Not dramatically, subtly. Enough to matter. Enough to haunt. Then something else happened. The public data feeds stopped updating. Not all of them. Just the ones people checked most. Graphs lagged behind. Files were delayed. Explanations were vague. Routine review, verification process, data backlog, all normal words, all reasonable. But the timing felt wrong because the silence began right when certainty arrived. Across continents, astronomers noticed the same thing. Less communication, more closed meetings, fewer shared charts. The anomaly window was closing, and with it, the conversation. No announcement was made, no warning given, just a slow dimming of transparency, as if someone had gently lowered the lights. Without telling the audience, the show wasn't over. That's when the quiet fear crept in. Not fear of aliens, not fear of invasion, fear of not being told the truth. Because humanity has lived with uncertainty before. What we struggle with is silence. Silence suggests choice, and choice suggests control. The object continued its path. The data kept flowing. Somewhere. But the shared discussion faded. Scientists who had been vocal grew cautious. Those who asked too many questions were reminded to stay grounded, to stay conservative, to stay quiet. And in the background, the anomaly window slipped past, like a door closing. The strangest part? No one denied the anomaly. They just stopped talking about it. And that raised a darker question. If the signal wasn't dangerous, why hide it? if it was meaningless? Why delay if it was nothing? Why the silence? Silence is not absence. Silence is a response. Somewhere between the last confirmed data point and the first missing update, a realization formed. We weren't just observing 3I/Atlas anymore. We were reacting to it, adjusting behavior, changing tone, lowering voices. That's what humans do when something unsettles their sense of control. And perhaps that was the most telling signal of all. Not the light curve, not the reflectivity, not the perihelion drift, but the way we responded. When separate machines agreed on the impossible, because when the universe speaks clearly and we choose silence, it says more about us than about what we found. As Chapter 3 closed, the anomaly window was gone. The object moved on, the data thinned, and the questions grew heavier. If coincidence had faded and silence had replaced it, what did the anomaly show us? That we weren't ready to say out loud. And more unsettling still, was the window always meant to close once we noticed it? Space is supposed to be quiet, not silent in sound, but silent in rhythm. Stars burn endlessly. Planets drift without timing. Cosmic events explode without warning. There is no beat out there, no metronome, no reason for time to repeat itself. And yet, that's exactly what appeared. It started small, almost invisible, buried deep in the reflectivity data of 3I/Atlas. A rise, a fall, then again. At first, it looked like noise, random flicker, instrument chatter, cosmic interference. That's how space hides its secrets. Inside things we're trained to ignore. So scientists ignored it for a while, until someone did something simple. They overlaid the graphs. Night after night, observation after observation, and the flicker lined up perfectly. A pulse, not fast, not dramatic, but steady, measured, repeating. Like a heartbeat with no body attached. Every cycle matched the last. Same duration, same amplitude, same pause in between. That's when the room went quiet, because randomness doesn't repeat itself like that. Noise doesn't keep time. But this did. The pulse appeared during the same phase of observation, across different telescopes, across different continents. It didn't care where you were. It didn't care who was watching. It just kept going. Tick, pause. Tick, pause. A rhythm pressed into the dark. Someone asked the obvious question. Could this be rotation? So they tested it. If the object was spinning, the pulse would drift. Speed up, slow down. It didn't. The timing stayed locked, as if rotation didn't matter, as if the pulse wasn't tied to motion, but to something internal. That idea made people uneasy, because internal behavior suggests structure, and structure suggests design. The pulse didn't match solar flares, didn't match magnetic storms, didn't match background stars. It belonged to 3I/Atlas, and only to it. Someone ran the numbers again. The interval was exact, not approximate. Exact, down to fractions of a second. Nature rarely cares about fractions of a second. Machines do. The word clock-like appeared in a draft report, then disappeared. Edited out, replaced with safer language, regular variation, periodic reflectivity. But the meaning didn't change. This thing was keeping time. As the data spread quietly, so did the tension. Because a pulse isn't just a pattern. A pulse is a message waiting to be decoded. Human history is built on pulses. Drums, signals, beacons, anything that repeats is trying to be noticed. And that thought crept into the minds of people who didn't want it there. What if this isn't noise? What if it never was? What if this is the object doing exactly what it was designed to do when it reaches a certain point in space? The void around 3I/Atlas didn't respond. No echoes. No interference. Just darkness. And inside that darkness, the pulse continued. The closer scientists looked, the stranger it became. The pulse wasn't constant across all wavelengths. It favored specific bands of light, as if choosing how to be seen. Visible light, near infrared, not radio. Not gamma, careful, selective, like someone whispering instead of shouting. That choice mattered, because radio waves would have been obvious, easy to label as communication. Light is subtler. Light can pretend to be natural. Light hides in plain sight, and whoever or whatever designed this knew that. Some suggested a natural explanation. Crystalline surfaces, thermal oscillations, exotic materials reacting to heat, all possible. None convincing, because none of them explain timing. They explain reaction. This wasn't reacting. It was maintaining. Holding rhythm against chaos. That's not what rocks do. As discussions deepened, something else became clear. The pulse wasn't changing. Not as the object moved away from perihelion. Not as solar energy dropped. Not as distance increased. It stayed locked, as if powered by something independent of the sun. That idea landed hard, because if the sun wasn't driving the pulse, then what was? There was a moment, small, almost forgettable, when someone joked, "Maybe it's saying hello." No one laughed, not because they believed it, but because it no longer sounded impossible. The most unsettling part wasn't the pulse itself. It was how calm it felt. No urgency, no escalation. Just steady presence. Like a lighthouse that doesn't care who sees it. It simply exists and waits. Some began to wonder if the pulse was always there, and we were only seeing it now because we were finally looking the right way. That thought reframed everything. Maybe the universe is full of signals, and most of the time we just don't notice them. The pulse continued for days, then weeks, never drifting, never fading, never responding, just being. And that raised a terrifying question. If this is a signal, who is it for? Us, something else, or no one at all? Because not all signals are messages. Some are markers, buoys in the dark, evidence that someone passed through and wanted to leave a trace. As the pulse pressed on, the data once again began to thin. Access slowed, analysis narrowed. The same pattern returned. Anomaly, then silence. But by now, the damage was done. You can't unsee a rhythm. You can't unknow timing. Once the universe shows you a beat, you start listening everywhere. And that's when perception changed again. Not in observatories, in people. Because the idea that something out there could pulse with intention made Earth feel smaller, quieter, less alone, or maybe less safe. As Chapter 4 closed, the pulse did not stop. It simply drifted farther away, fainter, harder to detect, like a voice lowering, not ending. And the final question lingered, heavier than before. If this was noise, it was the most organized noise we've ever seen. But if it was a signal, then the real mystery isn't what it says. It's why it speaks so softly, across a void vast enough to swallow meaning itself. And why, after all this time, we happen to be listening. Space is cold, not just empty, but unforgiving. Heat fades fast out there. There is no air to hold it, no ground to trap it. Objects warm when the sun touches them, and cool when it lets go. That's the rule. And rules are comforting, until something ignores them. The thermal data arrived quietly, not with alarms, not with urgency, just another layer of numbers added to the growing file on 3IATLAS. At first glance, it looked normal. A gentle warming as it moved closer to the sun, a slow cooling as it drifted away. Exactly what physics predicts. For a moment, everyone relaxed. Then someone zoomed in, and that calm disappeared, because buried inside the averages were spikes, short, sharp, precise. Moments where the object heated up, then cooled down without any change in sunlight. No flare, no shadow, no rotation shift, just heat. Then release. Like a breath. That shouldn't happen. In deep space, temperature changes are slow. Lazy, they drag, they don't jump. But these changes were sudden, localized, contained, as if something inside the object was turning on, then off. Someone suggested friction, but friction needs motion, and there was none. Someone suggested cracking ice, but that leaves signatures, gas. Debris, chaos. None appeared. The surface stayed clean, silent, intact. That's when the phrase slipped into conversation. Internal regulation. It was said softly, carefully, because those words don't belong to rocks. They belong to systems. The thermal patterns weren't random. They followed timing, not the same rhythm as the pulse, but close enough to feel connected. Heating during specific intervals, cooling during others, always controlled, always contained, never exceeding a limit, like a thermostat, set by something that knew exactly where the danger line was. The sun wasn't driving it. Distance wasn't driving it. Even orientation didn't fully explain it. The heat came from within, and that idea changed the tone of every room that heard it. Because an internal heat source means energy, and energy means purpose. Scientists checked everything they could. Radioactive decay, too weak. Tidal stress? No nearby mass. Chemical reactions? No residue. Every natural explanation fell short. Not impossible, just unlikely. And unlikely stacked on top of anomaly starts to feel like design. The most unsettling part wasn't the heat itself. It was the restraint. The object never overheated, never cooled too far. It maintained balance, like it was protecting itself, like it cared about its own condition. That thought lingered longer than anyone wanted, because care implies intent, and intent implies awareness. No one claimed it was alive, not even close, but something about the behavior felt responsive, as if the object sensed its environment and adjusted accordingly. That's not how debris behaves. Debris doesn't respond, It endures, or it breaks. 3I/Atlas did neither. It adapted. As the thermal data layered over the pulse data, something new emerged. The heat changes didn't overlap the pulses, they avoided them. When the pulse peaked, thermal activity dipped. When the pulse rested, heat rose. Alternating, like two systems taking turns, never colliding, never interfering. That kind of coordination doesn't happen by accident. Even complex natural systems overlap. They clash, they interfere. This didn't. It felt managed. Somewhere deep in the analysis, a chilling idea surfaced. What if the pulse wasn't just a signal? What if it was a process? And what if the heat wasn't waste, but control? That possibility reframed everything. Because suddenly, the object wasn't just reflecting light, it was doing work, invisible work. Work we didn't understand. The more they studied it, the clearer one thing became. Whatever was happening inside 3I/Atlas was efficient. No excess, no loss. Every thermal change served a purpose. But what purpose? Navigation? Preservation? Activation? No one knew. And that not knowing began to press heavily. Because the universe is vast, but not wasteful. If something exists, it usually has a reason. As the object moved farther from the sun, expectations returned. It should cool now, stay cold. It didn't. Instead, brief warming events continued. Weaker, but still there. Like embers refusing to die. As if the internal system didn't depend on the sun at all. That was the moment some scientists stopped thinking of 3I/Atlas as an object and started thinking of it as a container. Not alive, not conscious, but purposeful, built to endure cold, built to manage heat, built to travel for a very long time. And suddenly, the age question returned. If this thing has been regulating itself across interstellar space, how old is it? Millions of years? Billions? Older than Earth's oceans? Older than life itself? That idea sat heavy, because if intelligence existed long enough to build something like this, then intelligence isn't rare, it's patient. And patience is far more unsettling. As before, access to detailed thermal data became harder. Summaries replaced raw numbers. Graphs simplified, explanations softened. But enough had been seen. You can't erase heat. You can't hide temperature, because temperature is truth made visible. And the truth here was simple. 3I/Atlas was not passively drifting. It was maintaining itself. And maintenance is a choice. As Chapter 5 closed, the object continued outward. Cooling, but never fully cold. Silent, but never inert. Balanced, in a place where balance shouldn't exist. The question no longer felt speculative. It felt unavoidable. How can something regulate heat in deep space, unless something inside is responding? And if something is responding, what is it responding to? The sun? Us? Or a program written long before Earth ever learned what warmth meant? Because the cold of space reveals many things, but it reveals intention, most of all. Science loves curves. They tell stories without words. A rise means growth. A fall means loss. A wobble means struggle. For decades, scientists have learned to read them like fingerprints. Every natural object leaves a messy signature. Nothing is perfect, nothing is clean. Until now. When the latest simulations finished running, something unsettling happened. They didn't explode with errors. They didn't spiral into chaos. They aligned. One by one, the models failed. Not loudly, but politely. A red line drifting away from reality. A quiet mismatch, a small note in the margin. Does not fit observed curve. They adjusted parameters. Surface roughness, rotation speed, material density. Still wrong. They pushed further. Exotic ice mixtures, metal-rich bodies, unusual shapes. Still wrong. The light curve of 3I/Atlas refused to behave like anything born in nature, so someone tried something different. Not a rock, not ice. An engineered shape, a controlled surface, symmetry. The result froze the room. For the first time, the curve fit. Not perfectly, but close enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Because the shape that matched wasn't chaotic. It was deliberate. Smooth transitions, balanced angles, consistent reflectivity. The kind of curve you get when something is designed. Engineers use curves like this every day to control heat, to manage light, to reduce stress. Nature doesn't care about efficiency. Design does. And suddenly, the phrase artificial curves stopped sounding dramatic. It sounded accurate. The simulations showed something else too. The light curve wasn't just smooth. It minimized extremes. No sudden glare. No deep shadows. Almost as if the object was avoiding attention, or damage, or both. That idea changed the tone completely. Because if this were artificial, then it wasn't meant to be obvious. It wasn't a beacon. It wasn't a message. It was subtle, like a probe designed to pass unnoticed. And that raised a question no one wanted to answer. Who builds something subtle enough to hide in plain sight and sends it across interstellar space? The age problem returned with force. Interstellar travel is slow, painfully slow. Even at incredible speeds, crossing between stars takes thousands of years, tens of thousands, more. So if this object was engineered, it wasn't built recently. It wasn't responding to us. It was sent long before humans had telescopes, long before we understood light curves or perihelion or thermal regulation, long before we knew how to listen. That realization sat like weight on the chest, because it reframed humanity's place in the timeline. We weren't early. We were late. The curves didn't suggest urgency. They suggested patience. Long-term thinking, the kind of thinking that doesn't expect witnesses, but prepares for them anyway. As more teams tested the artificial models, a pattern emerged. The best fits weren't aggressive designs. They weren't weapons. They weren't massive structures. They were minimal, efficient, optimized to survive, not to dominate. That detail mattered, because it suggested intent without threat. Observation without invasion, like something sent to watch, not interfere. But watching is still an action, and action implies motive. That's where the discomfort deepened, because no model could answer the most important question. Why? Why send something like this? Why let it drift silently for millions of years, just to pass through one random solar system? Unless it wasn't random. Unless systems like ours were the point. Life-bearing stars, stable planets, long timelines, targets worth observing. That thought spread quietly, not as fear, as awe. And awe can be just as destabilizing. Because awe makes you feel small. The simulations continued. Some tried to force natural explanations back into the curve. They stretched assumptions, bent rules. But the cost grew too high. At some point, the model stops being science and becomes denial. And denial has a sound. It's quiet. It avoids headlines. It avoids conclusions. The phrase, unusual but natural, appeared more often, not because it fit better, but because it felt safer. Still, the curves didn't lie. They showed intention, even restraint, as if whoever built this object didn't want it to be discovered easily. Which raised another unsettling possibility. What if this is only one of many? What if space is full of quiet travelers, designed not to announce themselves, and we've only noticed this one by accident? That idea lingered longer than the rest, because it suggests the universe may already be crowded, just silent, not empty, just indifferent. As the object continued its path away from the sun, its light curve stayed consistent. No breakdown, no decay. Like a machine doing exactly what it was meant to do, and nothing more. That steadiness felt intentional, not dramatic, not theatrical. Just functional. And functionality is the strongest argument of all. Nature creates beauty. Engineering creates purpose. The curve showed purpose. As Chapter 6 came to a close, one truth settled in. If this object is artificial, then it was built by an intelligence that understood stars, time, and patience better than we ever have. An intelligence that didn't rush, didn't announce itself, didn't care if it was noticed until now. And the question no longer felt like science fiction. It felt like history waiting to be acknowledged. Who built it, and when was it sent? Because whatever the answer is, it means the story of intelligence in the universe didn't start with us. And it certainly doesn't end here. The questions didn't fade. They multiplied. They echoed across labs, forums, and late-night conversations between people who had spent their lives trusting data. But as the questions grew louder, the official voices grew quieter. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just less present. Updates slowed. Statements softened. Certainty dissolved into careful phrasing. Still under review. Insufficient evidence. Nothing conclusive. Safe words. Comforting words. Words that didn't match what the data had already shown. Inside public channels, the tone stayed calm. Routine, almost bored. But behind closed doors, something else was happening. Meetings without notes. Calls without recordings. Emails that ended mid-thought. The kind of silence that doesn't come from confusion, but from caution. The kind of silence that appears when people realize they may be standing at the edge of something irreversible. Scientists are not trained to hide truth. They are trained to question it. So when questions stopped being answered, it unsettled even them. Because uncertainty usually brings debate. This brought restraint. The more precise the anomaly became, the less was said about it, and that contradiction was impossible to ignore. Quiet rooms began to form. Not literal rooms, but spaces where information slowed down. Committees. Internal reviews. Coordination efforts. Places where data went in and rarely came back out. Those on the inside felt it first. A shift in tone, a hesitation before speaking, a glance exchanged when certain words were mentioned. Pulse, artificial, internal heat. Words that once sparked curiosity now triggered silence. Not denial, not dismissal. Silence. And silence is never empty. Silence is a decision. Some believed it was fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of embarrassment. Fear of overreaction. That happens in science. But this felt different, because the silence wasn't chaotic. It was structured. Questions weren't shut down aggressively. They were redirected, delayed, deferred. Let's wait for more data. Let's not speculate. Let's stay grounded. Reasonable advice, until it's repeated too often, until it becomes a wall. Behind that wall, the quiet rooms grew heavier. People who had spoken openly before chose their words more carefully. Some stopped speaking entirely, not because they had less to say, but because they understood the weight of what they were seeing, and weight changes behavior. Especially when the implications stretch beyond science. Because this wasn't just about an object in space anymore. It was about humanity's place in the universe, about timelines we don't control, about intelligence that may not need us or care if we exist at all. Those are not easy ideas to release into the world, especially not without answers. So the silence deepened. No press conference. No dramatic denial. No confirmation. Just absence. Like a radio station that stops broadcasting but never signs off. And that absence created its own signal. People noticed. Amateurs began tracking the data themselves. Independent analysts filled the gaps, and what they found only sharpened the questions, because the public-facing silence didn't align with the private certainty growing elsewhere. That gap became the loudest anomaly of all. Why stop talking right when the story gets interesting? Some argued it was responsibility, that releasing speculation could cause panic, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That caution is wisdom, and that's true. But there's a difference between caution and concealment. And this silence felt curated, measured, almost rehearsed, like the curves, like the pulse, like the restraint of the object itself. That parallel unsettled people because it suggested something deeper. What if the quiet wasn't about doubt? What if it was about timing? What if the answers existed but weren't ready to be shared? Or worse, what if the answers were shared, just not with us? That thought crept in slowly, uninvited, because history has taught us something uncomfortable. When institutions fall silent, it's rarely because they know nothing. It's often because they know too much and don't yet know what to do with it. Inside the quiet rooms, conversations likely turned philosophical, not about data, but about meaning, about responsibility, about whether humanity is ready to hear that it may not be alone, not in theory, but in evidence. Because once that door opens, it never closes again. You can't ask humanity to unlearn a truth like that. So the silence held, carefully, deliberately. Outside those rooms, people felt the shift. The universe felt closer and more distant at the same time. Closer because something had passed through our system with purpose. Distant because the answers felt locked away, just out of reach. As 3IATLAS continued its quiet journey outward. The quiet here deepened. No alarms, no revelations, just waiting. And waiting can be the hardest thing of all, because waiting suggests someone knows what comes next. As Chapter 7 closed, one question pressed heavier than the rest. Is the silence a sign of uncertainty, or is it proof that something has already been understood and carefully set aside? Because when the universe sends us a mystery and we respond with quiet rooms, it forces us to confront a deeper fear. Not that we don't know the truth, but that we do, and we're not sure the world is ready to hear it. At first it was a joke, the kind people make when an idea feels too big, too uncomfortable, too close. Maybe it's a machine. The word hung in the air for half a second. Then someone laughed, and the moment passed. But jokes have a way of returning when the data refuses to behave, because every natural explanation had been stretched thin. The curves were too clean, the pulse too precise, the heat too controlled. Piece by piece, coincidence had fallen away, and what remained needed a name. So the joke came back. This time, no one laughed. The phrase changed. Not machine, dormant machine. Something built to last, built to wait, built to do nothing until the right conditions arrived. That idea moved quietly through research circles, not shouted, not published, shared late at night over private calls in careful language, because no one wanted to be the first to say it publicly, but many were thinking it. A machine doesn't have to move. It doesn't have to transmit. It doesn't have to announce itself. Sometimes the most advanced machines are the ones designed to endure. And 3IATLAS was enduring everything. Cold that would shatter rock, heat that would destroy metal, time that erases intention. Still, it remained. The more people explored the idea, the more unsettling it became, because a dormant machine explains a lot. Why the pulse doesn't escalate, why the heat is controlled, why the light curve avoids extremes. A machine doesn't waste energy. A machine conserves. A machine waits, and waiting only makes sense. If time doesn't matter to you, that's where the age question turned dark. If this object is artificial, how old is it? Interstellar space is not forgiving. Cosmic radiation damages materials. Micrometeoroids erode surfaces. Time destroys everything. For something to survive a journey between stars, it must be built far beyond our current understanding, which means the intelligence behind it is not young, not rushed, not short-lived, older than Earth, older than life as we know it, possibly older than our sun. That realization landed like gravity, because it stretched the timeline of intelligence beyond anything humanity had imagined. We tend to think of intelligence as recent, a spark, a moment, but this suggested something else. A long arc, civilizations rising, building, sending machines that outlive them, and fading away, leaving only quiet travelers behind. Machines as fossils, machines as memory. The thought was haunting, because if this is a machine, it might be all that remains. Not a message, not a warning, just evidence. Evidence that intelligence once existed and had the patience to plan beyond its own lifespan. That idea shifted the emotional center of the story. This wasn't about invasion, or contact, or threat. It was about legacy, about whether intelligence, once born, tries to leave something behind. A witness, a record, a silent observer drifting through the dark, long after its creators are gone. Some compared it to a probe, others to a buoy, something designed to pass through star systems, collecting data, waiting for signs of life. But what kind of intelligence thinks that far ahead? One that has already faced extinction, one that understands impermanence. Because you don't build something to last millions of years unless you know you won't. That realization made the machine hypothesis feel less frightening and more tragic. If 3I/Atlas is a machine, it may not be watching us. It may not care about us at all. It may simply be continuing a mission set in motion long before humans walked upright. And that raises a quiet, painful question. What happens to intelligence when it has nowhere left to go? Does it expand? Does it observe? Does it send pieces of itself into the universe, hoping someone, someday, will notice? Because maybe this object wasn't meant for us. Maybe we just crossed its path at the wrong or right moment in history. The machine hypothesis gained strength, not because it was exciting, but because it was efficient. It explained restraint. It explained patience. It explained silence. Machines don't announce themselves unless programmed to, and this one didn't seem interested in being found until it was. And that brings up the most unsettling possibility of all. What if it wasn't dormant before? What if it was always active, and only now reached a point where its behavior became visible? What if we didn't wake it? What if we finally noticed it? That idea reframed everything. The pulse, the heat, the curves. Not signals meant for us, but internal processes we accidentally detected, like hearing the hum of a distant engine through the walls of space. And suddenly, humanity's role felt small. We weren't being contacted. We were eavesdropping. As discussions deepened, one final question overshadowed all others. If this is a machine, who built it? Not what species, not what planet, but what kind of intelligence chooses patience over presence? That sends machines instead of messages. That trusts time more than communication. An intelligence that doesn't need to be remembered, but still wants to know. That kind of intelligence doesn't fear being alone. It expects it. And that expectation is chilling, because it suggests a universe where intelligence is rare and fleeting, where civilizations rise, look outward, send their machines, and vanish, leaving only cold artifacts behind. As 3I/Atlas drifted farther away, the machine hypothesis stopped sounding radical. It started sounding reasonable, and that frightened people more than speculation ever could. Because reason doesn't ask permission, it follows evidence. As Chapter 8 closed, one truth pressed heavily into the silence. If this object is a machine, then intelligence did not begin with humanity, and it did not end with us either. We are not the first to wonder. We are not the first to look outward. We may not even be the most patient. And the final question lingered, slow and heavy. If something older than Earth built a machine to cross the stars, what did it hope to learn that made the wait worth it? The story didn't stay contained. It never does. At some point, mysteries escape the quiet rooms and spill into the world. It began slowly. A clipped headline, a short clip shared late at night, a forum thread asking an innocent question. What is 3I/Atlas? At first, people shrugged. Space is full of strange things. Most of them mean nothing. But this one felt different, because the silence around it was louder than the facts. As fragments of information reached the public, reactions split instantly. Fear, awe, denial. All at once. Some people felt a rush of wonder. They stared at the night sky differently, longer than usual. If something artificial really passed through our solar system, then the universe suddenly felt alive, older, deeper, filled with stories we haven't heard yet. For them, the idea was beautiful, a reminder that humanity might not be alone in its curiosity. Others felt something colder, a tightness in the chest, because curiosity cuts both ways. If something can observe us, then we are no longer just observers. We are part of the experiment. And that thought frightened people. Social feeds filled with arguments. It's impossible. It's exaggerated. It's just another space rock. Denial arrived fast. Because denial is protection. If the universe is empty, then we are safe. If we are alone, then nothing is watching. Comfort lives there. But the data, what little was visible, kept pushing back the pulse, the curves, the heat. Too many strange details to ignore completely. So people argued instead. Experts debated amateurs. Amateurs challenged experts. Certainty clashed with imagination. And in the middle of it all, something subtle changed. People started asking bigger questions, not about the object, about themselves. What would this mean for us? Would it change anything? Would we even matter anymore? Those questions revealed a deeper fear. Not fear of aliens, fear of insignificance. Human history has always placed us at the center. Our planet, our sun, our story. Even when science pushed us outward, we still believed we were special. But the idea that intelligence existed long before us and didn't bother to announce itself, that cut deep. Some reacted with wonder, others with anger. If it's real, why haven't they contacted us? Why now? Why this way? Those questions assume intention, assume we matter. And maybe that's the hardest part to accept. What if we don't? What if this object has nothing to do with us at all? That possibility unsettled people more than invasion ever could, because invasion acknowledges importance. Indifference does not. Late-night shows joked about it. Memes appeared. Humor is how humans cope with fear. But beneath the jokes, the unease remained. People looked at the stars differently. Not as distant lights, but as places with history, with memory. With watchers we may never meet. Religious groups responded in their own ways. Some saw confirmation, others saw threat. Some saw silence as divine design. Others saw it as a test. Philosophers weighed in. If intelligence exists elsewhere, they asked, what does that say about meaning? And the public listened, because this wasn't just science anymore, it was identity. The idea of a cosmic awakening spread. Not a literal awakening, but a mental one, a shift in how humanity sees itself. For centuries we've looked outward, asking, is anyone there? Now the question felt reversed. What if someone already passed by? That reversal changed the tone. We were no longer seekers. We were latecomers. And that stung. Some clung harder to skepticism. They demanded proof. clear signals, direct contact, no ambiguity, because ambiguity is uncomfortable. It forces you to sit with uncertainty, and humans hate uncertainty. But others embraced the mystery. They felt small and strangely peaceful. Because being small in a vast universe can be freeing. It means the pressure to be everything disappears. It means intelligence isn't a miracle. It's a process, one that may rise and fade again and again. That idea humbled people, and humility is rare. As debates raged, one thing became clear. The object itself wasn't changing. 3I/Atlas continued outward, silent, unbothered. It didn't react to our attention, didn't flare, didn't respond. That lack of response split reactions even further. To some, it meant the theories were wrong. If it were real, something would happen. To others, it meant the opposite. That's exactly what we'd expect. A machine doesn't care who notices it. A relic doesn't wake up for applause. And so the arguments looped endlessly. Fear versus wonder, meaning versus coincidence, awakening versus projection, and maybe that was the point, because the object wasn't forcing a conclusion. It wasn't delivering answers. It was acting like a mirror, reflecting our hopes, our fears, our need to matter. And that reflection was uncomfortable, because it revealed something human. We don't just search the universe for life. We search it for reassurance that we are not alone, that we are not insignificant, that our story is part of something larger. 3I/Atlas offered no reassurance, only presence, and presence without explanation is unsettling. As public attention peaked, the noise slowly began to fade. New stories replaced it. New crises demanded focus. But something lingered, a quiet awareness, a subtle shift. People didn't forget the object. They internalized it. The universe felt less empty, less silent, less owned. And that awareness doesn't go away easily. As Chapter 9 closed, humanity stood divided. Some clung to certainty. Some leaned into wonder. Some refused to choose. And hanging over all of it was one unanswered question. Are we witnessing a cosmic awakening? Or are we doing what humans have always done, projecting meaning onto the unknown? Because the unknown scares us. Because maybe the truth lies somewhere quieter. Not in fear, not in awe, but in acceptance. That the universe does not exist for us, yet we exist within it. And sometimes, something passes through our sky, not to change our fate, but to remind us how much we still don't understand, and how human our reactions are when faced with the infinite. Nothing failed. That was the strangest part. No instruments broke, no data collapsed. No numbers contradicted each other. The graphs stayed clean. The signals stayed steady. The patterns held. What broke was our understanding, because for a long time we believed truth came from discovery, from finding something new. But this felt different. This felt like realizing something old had been there the entire time. The shift didn't arrive as a headline. It arrived as a feeling, a quiet discomfort spreading through conversations, a pause before speaking, a moment where someone stopped mid-sentence and reconsidered what they thought they knew. The data didn't force a conclusion. It forced a question. And that question was heavier than any answer. What if the universe isn't empty, just quiet? What if intelligence doesn't announce itself, but observes? That idea changes everything. Because for centuries, humanity has pointed telescopes outward, expecting to be the ones doing the watching. We named stars, mapped galaxies, tracked motion. We assumed the role of observer, the center. But 3IATLAS didn't behave like something meant to be found. It behaved like something passing through, calm, measured, unconcerned. And that suggested a truth we weren't prepared for. Maybe observation goes both ways. The universe doesn't have to speak to be aware. That realization was subtle. But once it settled in, it didn't leave. Because if something can cross interstellar space, regulate itself, maintain patterns, and move on without reacting, then intelligence doesn't need to knock on our door. It doesn't need permission. It simply exists and continues. And suddenly, the question wasn't, is this artificial? The question became, what does artificial even mean in a universe this old? Our definitions felt small, limited by experience. We define intelligence by urgency, by communication, by response. But what if intelligence looks like patience? What if it values time over interaction? What if watching is enough? That thought unsettled even the most grounded minds, because it implies something humbling, that humanity may not be special for asking questions. Only for asking them now. Late, very late. The shift in truth wasn't about accepting aliens. It was about accepting irrelevance. Not insignificance, but non-centrality. That we are not the main story. Just one chapter. And that idea met resistance. Humans are storytellers. We need arcs, beginnings, climaxes. We need to matter. But the universe doesn't owe us narrative. It doesn't owe us clarity. It simply unfolds. 3IATLAS didn't demand belief. It didn't seek attention. It didn't correct misunderstandings. It just continued uninterrupted. And that was the lesson. Truth doesn't always arrive as revelation. Sometimes it arrives as endurance, as consistency, as something that refuses to bend to our expectations. The data never broke. Our models bent. Our assumptions cracked. Because we assumed intelligence would look like us. Curious, loud, communicative. But what if intelligence grows quieter as it ages? What if civilizations, once they learn enough, stop shouting, stop expanding, stop broadcasting, and instead send machines, not to speak, but to witness? That possibility reframed the universe, not as empty, but as restrained, filled with things that have learned the cost of attention, the cost of noise, the cost of being seen. And suddenly, the silence made sense. Silence isn't absence. Silence is control. As this understanding spread, something changed in the way people talked. Less certainty, more humility. Scientists stopped asking how to prove it wrong, and started asking what it would mean if it were right. Philosophers revisited old ideas. That intelligence isn't destiny. That survival isn't guaranteed. That observation might be the final phase of awareness. To watch, to record, to remember, even if no one is left to remember you. That idea hurt. because it suggests a future where humanity might one day do the same. Send our machines outward. Let them drift. Let them outlive us, not as conquerors, not as messengers, but as proof we were once here. That shift in truth carried weight. It changed how people saw space, not as a frontier, but as a record, a place where traces of long-dead minds might still move. Quietly, patiently, unnoticed, until someone looks the right way. And that raised the final, unsettling question. If the universe has been watching back all along, what does it see when it looks at us? A young species, loud, impatient, obsessed with meaning, still shouting into the dark, hoping for an answer. Are we ready to accept that we might be observed, not judged, not contacted, just noted? Because being watched doesn't mean being important. It means being present, and presence alone doesn't grant purpose. Purpose must be chosen. As Chapter 10 closed, the truth didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, heavy, unresolved. The object was almost gone now, fading into distance, its signals thinning, its patterns dissolving into noise. But the shift it caused remained, a fracture in certainty, a widening of perspective, the realization that truth doesn't always change the universe. Sometimes it changes us. And if observation really does change belief, then we are already different than we were before 3I/Atlas appeared. More cautious, more humble, more aware. And as we stand beneath a sky that feels less empty than it used to, one final question waits, unanswered. If the universe has already been watching back, what happens next when it sees that we've finally noticed? And then it was gone. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just farther away. 3I/Atlas continued its quiet journey, slipping back into the dark it came from. The pulse weakened, the light curve flattened, the thermal signals faded into the background noise of space. No final flash, no last message, no goodbye. The universe did not close with punctuation. It simply moved on. What remained was data, clean, consistent, perfect. Numbers that refused to collapse into a simple answer. Charts that told a story without explaining why it mattered. For scientists, this should have been satisfying. Data is the goal. But this time, it felt hollow. Because data without meaning leaves a different kind of silence. The kind that lingers. The kind that follows you home. As days passed, attention shifted elsewhere. New discoveries, new crises, new noise. The sky didn't change, the stars didn't blink. But something subtle had already shifted. People spoke differently now, with more pauses, more "we don't know," less certainty, because certainty had been challenged, and it didn't recover. The object was no longer visible to most instruments. Only the records remained, frozen in databases, archived, reviewed again and again, and every time someone reopened the files, the same feeling returned. Not excitement, not fear, recognition. Like rereading a letter you never fully understood, but know was important. The silence after the signal was heavier than the signal itself, because signals demand reaction. Silence demands reflection, and reflection is uncomfortable, because it asks questions with no deadlines. What did we just witness? A rare anomaly? A natural oddity? A machine? A relic? or something else entirely. Something quieter, something harder to label. There was no confirmation, no official declaration, no moment where humanity agreed on what had happened. History doesn't always give us clarity. Sometimes it gives us events that only make sense much later, long after the people who witnessed them are gone. That idea unsettled many, because it suggested that meaning might not belong to the present, that we might have seen something we are not yet ready to understand. And that's a difficult truth to accept. Humans like closure. We like endings. But the universe rarely offers them. Instead, it leaves us with echoes. The absence of 3I/Atlas became its own presence. A reminder that something passed through our system, noticed us or not, and left unchanged. That indifference was sobering, because it stripped away the fantasy of importance. The idea that discovery must revolve around us. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe some discoveries aren't meant to be celebrated, only carried. As years pass, the object will become a footnote, a line in textbooks, a debated case study, a remember when among astronomers. But for those who watched it closely, it will always feel unfinished, because it didn't answer our questions. It questioned our answers. It didn't prove intelligence exists elsewhere. It proved that we don't control the narrative of the universe. And that realization is quietly profound. Some began to ask a final, unsettling question. What if this wasn't discovery at all? What if it was a test, not a test designed for us? Not an exam with right or wrong answers, but a test of perception, of humility, of restraint. How do we react when faced with something we can't explain? Do we rush to claim it, fear it, dismiss it, or do we sit with uncertainty and let it change us? Because if intelligence older than Earth exists, it may not be interested in contact. It may be interested in observation, in how young civilizations respond to mystery, in whether they shout or listen. And perhaps, that was the point. 3I/ATL didn't transmit instructions. It didn't warn. It didn't guide. It simply behaved in a way that challenged our assumptions. And then it left, like a mirror, passed briefly in front of our species, showing us who we are when answers are taken away. The long silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reflective. People looked up more often, not expecting signals, just aware. Aware that the universe may be more populated with history than we thought. Aware that intelligence might not look like science fiction. Aware that we are not the final chapter, just the current one. The idea that this could have been a test lingers for one reason, because tests don't announce themselves. You only realize you were being tested after it's over. And by then, the results are already written, not in data, but in behavior, how we reacted, how we spoke, how we chose silence, or curiosity, or fear. The object didn't change course. It didn't respond to attention. It didn't care if we understood it. That indifference might be the most honest message of all. The universe doesn't exist to be understood by us. We exist within it. And sometimes something passes through our sky, not to teach us facts, but to test whether we are capable of sitting with the unknown without turning away. As the years stretch forward, 3I/Atlas will move on, passing other stars, other systems, other skies, perhaps unnoticed, perhaps already noticed long ago. And someday, far in the future, Another civilization might see it and ask the same questions and wonder if someone else saw it before them and how they reacted. That thought connects us to something larger, a chain of observers across time, all staring at the same quiet traveler, each interpreting it through their own fears and hopes. And maybe that's the real legacy of the signal. Not proof of intelligence, but proof of continuity. That the universe allows moments where awareness brushes against something ancient and is changed by it, even if nothing else happens, even if no answers ever come. As this story ends, nothing explodes, nothing is revealed. The universe remains vast, cold, indifferent, and yet less empty than it was before. Because we now know something important. Not about them, about us. That we are capable of noticing, of questioning, of pausing. And that might be enough for now. So the final thought lingers, quietly, without resolution. Was this a discovery? Or a test we didn't know we were taking? And if it was a test, then the only question that truly matters is this. When something unknown passed through our sky, did we prove ourselves curious, or did we prove ourselves afraid? Because long after the signal fades, that answer stays with us in the silence, looking back